Well, of the many executive orders that Donald Trump signed today, surprisingly, one was not the introduction of onerous tariffs on imported goods, which he promised during his campaign. But as Ed said, markets reacted as soon as Trump said that 25% tariffs are coming for Mexico and Canada within 2 weeks. Now, trade agreements with all countries will be analysed and Australia won't be immune. So let's bring in here the man who negotiated Australia's free trade agreement with America that came into force 20 years ago. That's Mark Vaile, who's the former Deputy Prime Minister and was the Trade Minister when those negotiations were held. Mark, many thanks for your time. In a world where the United States might be raising tariffs and we are used to free trade agreements, should Australia be fearful of what the United States is about to undertake?
I really don't think so. I mean, the FTA has been in place for almost 20 years or just on 20 years. And during that time, our two-way trade with the United States has doubled. The levels of two-way investment have tripled. And Australia actually has more invested in the United States than the United States has invested in Australia. I think the important thing for the government to do today is to be fully engaged with the Trump administration on these matters and talking about how we are like-minded. I think I agree with your former commentator that the targets, Canada, Mexico and China, they are the largest exporters into the United States in the range of 13 to 15% of America's imports each come from one of those three countries, where from Australia it's a much lower figure, like about 0.5% of American imports come from Australia. And so I think that if we remain engaged, we establish a very good working relationship quickly with the Trump administration, we shouldn't have too much to worry. I think that President Trump is using this public debate to position the US to put more pressure on those large exporters into the US, being Canada, Mexico and China.
Well, I know when you were negotiating a free trade agreement, the key is always about agriculture. Farmers are a very strong lobby, both here and in the United States. American farmers are very much about protecting their own backyard. I just wonder whether that is an area of some potential change in the relationship between Australia and the United States and our agreement.
That remains to be seen. I mean, there were, some very important sectors have been seriously opened up and quotas dramatically increased during those 20 years. For example, the Australian beef industry enjoys about $2.6 billion worth of exports into the United States, and that has run very, very smoothly for the last 20 years. There's not been an instance, to my knowledge, of safeguard mechanisms being implemented. Over 20 years ago, the US implemented safeguard mechanisms with lamb exports from Australia, but we dealt with that with the administration of the Bush administration at the time, and just given the closeness of the relationship between Australia and the United States, that was able to be resolved, and that, I believe, certainly can be the case today.
And the key ones where Australia might otherwise be vulnerable would be the steel industry, where our domestic steel industry does export, and also the aluminium industry, which already is having tough times because of high energy and electricity prices that even the current government's trying to address. These have also been some conflict points in the past when it comes to global trade.
They have been, and certainly the safeguard mechanisms in the agreement have been applied to steel on a number of occasions over the last couple of decades. But through the dialogue and the strength of the relationship, those issues have been able to be resolved. And certainly in our day with the Bush administration, there were some safeguard tariffs applied to steel universally in terms of imported steel into the United States. But we were able to negotiate that away and get relief for Australian exporters in that circumstance. And that certainly should be the case today. As I say, the most important thing for the Australian government and our representative in Washington today is to work closely with the Trump administration. And so there's a complete understanding of the things that we have done together over the last few decades.
And is it easy for Australia to try and navigate that very thin line between China and having a free trade agreement on one side and having a free trade agreement with America on the other side under the Trump administration?
Well, it should be. I mean, it should be viewed in the context, the economic context that it is. I mean, we have a trade deficit with the United States of about $32 billion. We have a trade surplus with China of about $110 billion. Yet the United States has a deficit with China, and I'm not sure what size that is. And so it swings and roundabouts. It's a very, very important economic relationship, the business relationship that we have with China, notwithstanding the sensitivities that exist at the moment. Just as the United States we are a very, very strong economic partner of theirs, where they enjoy that $32 billion trade surplus in goods and services, and Australian companies have $1.2 trillion invested in the United States.
So just tell me, the other thing is defence. That's obviously a pretty strong breaking point, which in terms of our relationship with America will hold pretty strongly.
Look, I think that the level of support, particularly for the latest agreement, the AUKUS agreement, across both sides of the aisle, in the administration, in the Senate and in the House, I think will sustain that. I don't think there will be a problem there. Our view is, with interlocutors we've been talking with in recent times, that certainly will survive the change in administration. And of course, there are now three very strong pillars under this bilateral relationship between Australia and the United States. The ANZUS Treaty, the Free Trade Agreement, and now AUKUS.
All right, that's great stuff. Mark Vaile, former Deputy Prime Minister, I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ross.